Can you hear me? I think you're muted. Oh. Okay, can you hear me?
Yep, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right.
You can go ahead and share your screen.
It says it's disabled by the host.
Oh, I'm sorry, here. There you go, try now.
Okay.
Cool.
All right.
All right. So we'll go ahead and get started at 1 o'clock. It's about 10 minutes. I got 8 minutes on my clock.
Okay.
I want to see if I can continue sharing the music. Doesn't look like I can. Quit. Nope. Can't share music. All right, I'll come back in at 1 o'clock.
Okay.
For those of you who are with us today, welcome. And if you could please respond to our pre-test here, it'd be greatly appreciated. And then we'll get started in a few minutes here.
Hi, I don't see a pre-quiz poll today.
Well, it is up. Do you have a function on your Zoom screen that says something about viewing a poll or anything like that?
No, I'm just seeing Chris's screen.
Okay.
Oh, wait, just popped up.
Awesome.
I hate to say it, but it left just as soon as it popped up. Oh, well.
You know, it might be because I'm trying to move it from the center of my screen. So maybe I'm impacting it. I apologize if it is me.
I still see it. Do you see at the bottom, Susan, there's it'll say participants, polls, chat, share screen.
I see participants, chat, and share. I don't
Maybe
see
that's 'cause
poll.
that might be me. That's all I've got.
Yeah, I had no problem with the poll last week.
Maybe it'll pop up again. I'll leave it up for a while to see if it, actually, let me see if I can end the poll and relaunch it.
There it is.
Okay. All right, Chris, you ready?
Just one sec.
Okay.
Just want to check something real quick. Okay, yeah. I may have an issue on the poll, Gaylynn. I'll talk to you about that later.
Okay.
It looks like one of the questions, there may be a mistake on one of the questions. I was just looking through. Anyway, we'll get to the presentation. Okay.
Okay. That's good.
Should I just get started?
All right. So good morning or good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our third session of our Beginning Vegetable Gardening series. Today, we will be talking about pests and pest control in your garden, because as it gets warmer, you may be dealing with pests right now. I certainly am. But definitely, they're just going to keep coming. And today with us, we have Chris Epes. He is the extension agent, horticulture extension agent in the city of Norfolk. So for those of you who are in the city of Norfolk, please take the time to get to know Chris. He is very knowledgeable and really knows about his plants. So Chris, I will leave it to you. Oh, I'm sorry. I will be floating around in the chat box as well as Rhonda Graves, who is one of my master gardeners, trying to get questions answered for you, and any questions that you may have missed or feel that Chris may answer better, we will send it to him. And so now, Chris, I'll give it over to you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Chris, and as Gaylynn said, I'm the horticulture agent for the city of Norfolk. This presentation is called Natural Pest Control for the Home Garden, and it is, there's an asterisk next to the word natural because, of course, that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So the asterisk is meant to kind of acknowledge that. I know that, we try to be very careful with the terminology that we use, but this is a little subjective. So just kind of be aware that this is kind of, that we are going to talk about a product or two that is like a natural derivative, but that doesn't mean it's safe, to be exposed to. That doesn't mean it doesn't have downsides in the environment. So just, kind of be aware. What we're looking at is what you would call in the more natural end of the spectrum when it comes to the products that are available to you. So just like I said, keep that in mind, but we will get going. So why go the quote unquote natural route? I think for a lot of people, the first thing that comes to mind is safety, especially when it involves vegetable gardening, because of course you don't want anything that you're eating to have residues on it could be harmful to you, your pets, or your family. Also sustainability, and this is something that we talk about a lot when it comes to pesticide use, is the sustainability of it, especially if it's causing undue harm to our insect populations that work so well to benefit us in certain ways. Also sustainability as far as we go too, because if we're using a product that is unsafe to us, that doesn't necessarily mean it's sustainable for our long-term health. Insect resistance, this is kind of a component of sustainability. So insects do develop resistance to most chemicals over time. And this is shown in a lot of the things that we use in a large commercial scale in big agriculture. We'll talk about one in particular that's pretty widely available at the garden centers for homeowners like y'all. Cost considerations for sure. Chemicals can be expensive, and it can be, it can be a little more costly of your time to go the natural route, because a lot of that does involve cultural strategies, and we'll talk about what I mean by that. Do you want to be more giving of your time to do more work in the garden, or do you want to just make a big purchase of chemicals, throw them in the tank and do an application? And then of course, health is certainly a cost consideration that you want to take into account. Not only the health of you and those around you, your family, your pets, but also the health of the ecosystem, the health of all of the biological factors that are in place in your garden, in that small ecosystem that make it successful and make it go. And with that in mind, something that you all always want to keep in mind is that there are always at least some natural forces acting on all the organisms in the environment, causing populations to rise and fall. And it's just as relevant in your garden as it is out in the rainforest. And what you want to do as kind of the steward of your garden is be aware of the influence of those natural forces, be aware of what they are, and whether or not you can use them to your advantage. And there are a number of, there's virtually no end to the things that you can take advantage of when you really start honing in on the very, very small variables. But from a larger standpoint, climate, this obviously don't plant a plant that's going to struggle in a certain climate. Make sure that it's right plant, right place. If you have an insect issue, be aware of the weather coming up, be aware of maybe something's going to happen, like a cold spell that could work in your favor. Be aware of natural enemies. If we're going to talk about a couple things that whose populations thrive with the installation of like native perennial plants, like parasitic wasps and things of that nature. By incorporating a more diverse environment into your garden, you are facilitating the increase in population of natural enemies that'll work in your favor. Be aware of the geography and the environment. Be aware of whether or not you're, providing a place of shelter or a food source of sustenance for things that you don't want. You talk to a lot of people who really love to have roses, but don't want to have Japanese beetles. And, I understand, like I love roses myself, but you're kind of asking for, things just go hand in hand with one another when you're providing a food source for something. So that being said, we do want to address what's called the disease triangle first, because this concept is something that a lot of people who get hung up on using chemicals kind of forget about, and that's that when you have a disease or a pest outbreak, it's always a function of these three components: the pathogen, the environment, and the host. It's a combination of those things, and I think the last few slides kind of emphasize that if the environment is suitable for a pest or a disease, you will see that disease thrive. Even if it's, and if the environment's not suitable for the pest or disease, you won't see the pest or disease thrive, even if it's present, even if it's around. A healthy plant in a suitable environment can typically fight off most forms of pests and diseases. A lot of pathogens, a lot of pests tend to attack when there's a weakness, when something is occurring that can facilitate or instigate that attack. And that's why, like when I was in horticulture school and plant pathology, very complicated and nuanced class, there was rarely a single source of pathogen or disease for any problem that our teacher presented us with. It was always a combination of things, and that is a testament to how complicated it can be, and why we need to be paying attention to this disease triangle, which gives us like context. It lets you look at the whole picture. It's never just one thing, and chemical controls typically are only addressing one part of this, and that's the pathogen, aka pest. So you want to go more natural, quote unquote. What are my strategies? First things first, recommend this to everyone: document everything. This is a fantastic strategy because it allows you not to make the same mistakes twice. You did something last year. If you wrote everything that you did down, like what you planted, where you planted it, come up with a garden plan, when you planted it to the day, what the date it was, what the weather was like during that time, when did the last frost happen, all those things, that all contributes very, very strongly to helping you not make the same mistakes twice. And of course, this kind of points to the fact that if you did make mistakes, don't let that deter you. It's the best way to learn what not to do, is to do the wrong things. So I recommend documenting everything. Document all the varieties you used, exactly what kind of plants you used, because maybe those varieties are struggling, and you don't want to use those varieties again next year. And speaking of varieties, I did mention this a second ago: right plant, right place. Generally, stress plants can emit pheromones that attract insect pests, and stress plants are more prone to getting, are more prone to being susceptible to disease and pest attacks. So you want to make sure that you're planting the right plant in the right place, which means that, if it likes a lot of sunlight, don't plant it in shade, and vice versa. If it likes if it likes relatively dry soil, don't plant it in wet soil. Make sure you research your plants. You're putting them in a place that gets everything that they need to be healthy. And then keep in mind, some plants resist pest attacks better than others, especially in this day and age where we use throughout the green industry, we use a lot of plants that aren't native. And plants that aren't native can have drawbacks, some of which are they don't do as well here as our native plants do. So consider natives. You see here a graphic. That's the cover of the native plants for Southeast Virginia. That's a very, very cool little guidebook for what kind of native plants you can plant. And, you know, I recommend natives, of course, because they tend to be less susceptible to pest issues and more amenable to our environment here, because this is what they're used to. And then that other graphic of the tomatoes, that's meant to illustrate heirlooms versus hybrid tomatoes. So, you know, I love heirlooms, and, you know, but I've been a professional grower, and I understand that you have to take into account to some degree disease resistance, and most of our hybrid tomatoes are bred mostly for disease resistance. And for this reason, whenever I talk to beginning gardeners, I typically do recommend using hybrids first before they start trying out heirlooms, because it gives them a slightly better chance of success in battling diseases. And of course, we always want to get people off on the right foot, so that, you know, they have some success, they learn how to do it well, and then they move on to something maybe a little more challenging like heirlooms. Although that's not to say heirlooms are particularly challenging. It's just what we're talking about is, like, you know, the hybrids are a little better suited for disease resistance. So generally speaking, you have a slightly better chance with them. But I know heirloom fanatics who might dispute that. Timing, that's another it's another good tool that you can take advantage of. Time your planting so the majority of the crop will avoid peak pest infestations. So this one on the right is the squash bug, and our pest management guide recommends that we wait until July or so, maybe mid-July, to plant our squash to try to avoid the peak infestations of this one. And then in the middle, you have the Mexican bean beetle. And this is an interesting one. This one, you know, can be devastating to our bean plants and does kind of persist throughout the whole year. But what you can do, a neat little trick, is to plant some beans in the very early spring, and all the Mexican bean beetles, like if you know you have an issue with them, all the ones that were dormant over winter will flock to those plants. And then once you see that they're pretty thoroughly infested, you just throw them all into a garbage bag and throw them away. And that you have gotten rid of the bulk of your Mexican bean beetle population that's right there locally. So that's a neat little trick, using timing in your favor. And then the last picture of basil on the right, you can't really tell, but if you look closely, you see a little yellowing on those leaves, and that's an early indicator of basil downy mildew, which is kind of a new one over the last decade that we're starting to see. Can really wipe out basil crops, but usually we don't see it show up around here until about late July, early August at the soonest. So it's just something you want to be aware of. It's impossible to kind of protect most outdoor basil from, because it just floats around latent in the atmosphere. But being aware that late season basil might be a challenge for you, might be a deterrent for planting basil that late. So we're going to talk about cultural control methods for pests and disease. And what I mean by good culture, like that's defined as providing like the best possible environment around your plants to be conducive to good, healthy growth. So anything you can do to give your plant a good, happy environment, whether it's soil, whether it's, you know, around the plants themselves. And this is, you know, a perfect example, this idea of spacing. On most seed packets that I've ever seen, almost every seed packet I've ever seen, it tells you how close to space your plants. And that's, you know, a very important factor to take into account. That spacing provides a lot for the plant that I feel like most people underestimate. For one thing, plant strength. Now, if you've ever grown a bunch of potted plants very close together from small seedlings, and they get really, really crowded, and you pull the pots away from one another after they've gotten crowded into one another, you see that they all flop over because none of them can stand up on their own. That right there is a perfect illustration of why plants need space to kind of grow up on their own, to gain cell wall strength. That is what happens over time with a plant that has to stand up on its own. As it gets stronger and stronger. Additionally, you have this airflow and circulation that happens that contributes to the cell wall strength, and it also really keeps pathogens, pests, and diseases down and prevents them from jumping from plant to plant. If you have two plants that are touching, if leaves that are touching, it's going to be a lot easier for pests to move from one plant to the other. It's also going to be a lot easier for like moisture-borne fungi and bacteria from rainfall or splashing of some kind to jump from one plant to another. And if you have a bunch of plants that are really condensed into a small space, like in this picture here, this is a illustrative of square foot gardening, which is a really popular style of gardening, can be very successful with it. But these are tomato plants and probably about a 4 square foot bed space. And you can imagine, if you're familiar enough with gardening to know what a tomato looks like when it's full grown, one healthy tomato plant could well take up this entire space. So if you have 4, you may get some decent crowding in there. And what you may experience is that in the dense middle of that space, there's not going to be a lot of airflow. There's not going to be a lot of sunlight. So moisture is going to be able to kind of persist in there for long periods of time without getting dried out, without getting without just being evaporated or anything like that. And when you have a situation like that, that is like the precursor to fungal and bacterial pathogens, because they depend on moisture to survive and thrive. So these are things you want to be aware of. You got to let your plant have a little room to breathe, and not only that, but having sunlight, being able to hit probably every part of your plant is a great way to encourage even healthy growth. Be aware when you're creating a new garden and ripping up turf, the weeds and grass that was there, and the weeds and grass surrounding your garden may harbor harmful pests. So just be aware that, like, new gardens started on formerly turfed area, you may find a lot of harmful larvae, especially Japanese beetle. That's very pervasive in turf pretty much everywhere around here. You also may have some formidable weeds, and around here it's for me, it's Bermuda. That stuff is just a nightmare to have to manage. So you do want to make sure that you try to get all those roots out and stay on top of it. Crop rotation and cover crops, and this goes hand in hand with mulching as well. This is a big cultural benefit for soil health, is to keep some kind of residue on top of your soil. You basically never want to have bare soil when you talk about, like, improving soil health, for a number of reasons. For one, rain can compact it. 2, it can cause it to dry out much quicker. And it can it can discourage microbial activity near the top. But having that residue and having that mulch also is a great form of weed control. And this example right here is a cover crop example of soybean and, I guess, some kind of winter rye, where the winter rye is planted at the end of the soybean season. It grows up during winter, and then at the end of the winter season, it's rolled over and crimped into a mat over top of the soil, and the soybean seeds are planted right in there. And what you have is a situation where the soil never really has to endure any kind of bare, any kind of like bare situation. Also, another benefit of mulching is that a lot, especially with vegetable gardens, a lot of our vegetable diseases, our fungal and bacterial diseases, originate in the soil. And like I said, they need moisture to spread and proliferate. So if you have a tomato plant that you planted in bare soil, and you get a good bit of rain, and the soil is still bare, and you have diseases proliferating in the soil, what you can see is rain splashing from the soil. When it hits the soil, it splashes disease up into the plant. And having a mulch barrier between the soil and your vegetable plant goes a long way in disease control as well. Another example, row covers. This is a really, really great practical tool to use for pest control that I always recommend, especially for your winter, your cool season annual crops like your kale and collards and broccoli and cauliflower and all those things that you do during the cool season. This is one that I highly recommend, so you don't have to worry about worms eating up your crops. It can be it can be kind of expensive, moderately expensive at least, but you can save it and use it year after year. It's kind of the kind of expense you only have to make like one time, and it goes a long way. One thing you do want to keep in mind though is that it's like a cheesecloth type fabric. It does diffuse some amount of sunlight, and in doing that, you're reducing the amount of light that your plant gets, and for that reason you're not going to see quite like the growth rate is going to be diminished just a little bit, but nonetheless still very effective. Sanitation, this is my big one. This was like what I lived by when I was a producer. We were big time neat freaks. Like we cleaned all the time, and in doing so very rarely had to use chemicals for certain things. And this is just, in any way you can, the removal of sick, dying, or dead plant material or soil or anything you can find from the greenhouse, from your situation. Now, a lot of times, this material, as long as it's not diseased or harboring some kind of harmful pest, you definitely want to throw it in your compost bin. But there are a lot of things that you don't want to throw in your compost bin that you just want to get rid of, specifically when we talk about tomatoes. But you want to remove your sick, dead, dying plant material whenever you see it. Taking a look at this tomato on your left, it's getting blighted from the bottom, and a good way to kind of mitigate the spread of that disease is to just clip those leaves off as you see them go brown, because that'll significantly slow the spread. Another tip is to mulch. Mentioned that one in the last slide. Again, that goes a long way to preventing soil-borne diseases from jumping up into your plants. And then on the right, you see a little aphid colony, going to work there. Those aphids are rare. They're harmful. They're rarely fatal to plants unless you let it just get wildly out of control. But if you keep an eye out closely, throughout the process of the crop, whatever it is you're growing, you can kind of see them pop up in these little colonies on the ends of on meristems, on the growth tips of plants. If you just prune that off with your thumbnail or a pair of scissors and throw it away, it's a great way to keep them under control. Also, for something like that, you could just hose off the little colony as well. But the key here is just don't be shy about pruning off sick, dead, or dying plant material as you go through. The process of pruning actually, as long as you're not doing it, to an extreme extent, can actually encourage and stimulate more growth and more production from the plant, and it keeps diseases and things like that down, because diseases are going to be spreading via plant material that's dying or breaking down. So getting rid of it and keeping only healthy plant material, only healthy foliage on your plant will go a long way for you. And of course, know when to call it quits. I mean, that's really important. Sometimes you just have to rip the plant out and move on, and it's not the end of the world. I know, I'm certainly guilty myself of probably getting over-attached to certain plants, but you can do yourself a favor in a lot of instances by just saying, okay, I'm done, and moving on. Trapping. This is a new slide I put in here not too long ago. I received a catalog at the office advertising for these little traps, the ones you see in the top right picture there. These little cardboard traps that are made for just a number of different agricultural garden pests. And that really, I thought that's a really neat idea, because it allows you to not affect the environment in too many harsh ways, not use any kind of pesticides. And it got me to thinking about the other kinds of trapping. And This one, this little yellow, this big yellow strip you see, that's kind of a play off of the idea of yellow sticky cards. And I don't know if y'all are familiar with yellow sticky cards, but that's a pretty common monitoring tool. It's a little yellow card that has a glue substance painted onto it. And you place them around your greenhouse or around your garden to monitor and to monitor what kind of insects are floating around, because a lot of insects are attracted to the color yellow, and they will fly onto the card and get stuck there. And then you can kind of look and see, all right, what do I have here? And how many do I have based on what's on the card? Well, some people in the greenhouse industry saw how effective these cards were for trapping insects and decided to just make this giant tape and wrap their greenhouses with it. And it's not the worst idea in the world. And then lastly, we have the idea of a trap crop, which is very interesting. It's this idea that if you plant plants that your pest insects will flock to, it will take their attention away from the stuff that that you are trying to grow for some purpose. So on the bottom right here, we have a mix of sunflowers and sorghum, pretty little border going around some peppers being grown. And sunflower and sorghum are known to attract quite a number of pests. So that's the trap crop. That's what they've planted, a very nice looking border around their peppers that not only serves to look pretty good, but attracts pests of pepper plants. Scouting. So this is really important from a cultural standpoint. This goes a long way in helping you stay on top of what insects are there and helping you encourage beneficial populations. And this is just basically the routine, inspecting of your plants to see kind of what insects are there. And you have a picture there. That's a picture of a bunch of yellow sticky cards in a mum crop. That's a lot of action on a yellow sticky card. That's for sure. But that's exactly what its purpose is to see kind of what's floating around. But remember, when you walk around and when you scout, just remember that disease triangle. Remember that context is key. It's not necessarily about what insects you see. It's also about the environment being provided, and think about how the environment is encouraging what you're seeing. Scouting your transplants when you buy them, no matter where you buy them from, always a good idea to scout your transplants, whether it's the big box stores at a little garden center. You don't want to be bringing in pests to your garden if you can help it. So you want to make sure that you're inspecting those transplants and that they're clean. Inspect your plants regularly throughout their life cycle. Learn the insects that are there when you see them. Don't just abandon it without learning what it is, because you can't know how to control them or how to manipulate the environment to your favor unless you learn about those insects and their life cycles. Handpick pests off your plant. Don't be afraid to prune off little infected areas. Learn to tolerate damage and establish a threshold. And this idea of a threshold is it's an IPM strategy. It's an integrated pest management strategy where you're establishing like a point at which you must take some kind of action to suppress the pest pressure. What it means, what that implies though, is that you're allowing a certain amount of pest pressure before you take action. And this is important because you will absolutely never, ever in your wildest dreams, you won't be able to kill all the pests, all the insect pests. It's just impossible. And if you think that you can, or you're trying to, you're only going to be throwing away lots of time and lots of resources. So you have to establish a threshold, which is a point at which the pest population is high enough where you need to do something. And this allows a little bit of flexibility in your strategy. Look for natural predators, because they're going to be helping you in the garden. They're going to be helping you keep that pest population at a manageable level, at or below your threshold. Learn about those natural predators and support them. And we're going to talk about a few, some of which look no different than a common fly. And that just goes to show you there's a very large and complicated food web working out there that's working in your favor. Less than 3% of all insects are actually considered pests of some kind to people by most standards. So, that means there are a lot of other things flying around out there that can work in your favor. You just have to know what they are and how to support them. Great way to ID insects. I have this picture up here of a digital microscope. It is one that plugs right into your USB drive on your computer. And it's way easier to manage than a big clunky thing. You got to put oil on a slide, all those things. And this one, I have one that I bought for $40 on Amazon. So you can get them. I've seen them as cheap as $30, all the way as expensive as like $3,000. So if you have the means, I would recommend it, just because it makes it really easy to get a good close-up shot of an insect. But the most important thing is it allows you to take really good pictures, really good close-up pictures of the insect under the microscope. And when you can do that, you can very easily send it to an extension agent and get a very fast ID on what it is that you have. But you want to ask yourself a couple questions in the process of identifying the insect. One, where did you find it? Because that'll often, I'll preface this by saying insects are wily. They're hard to track. A lot of people are scared of them because they're small and they can fly, so they're just very mobile. When you know what you're looking at, they're not that unpredictable. So asking yourself these questions go a long way in telling you what they are. Like, where did you find it? You're not going to typically find insects living frequently away from their food source. So, where did you find it can give you a good indication of what it is, because it'll, knowing what exactly it's feeding on will give you a good indication of what it is. What time of year is it? Again, that's a life cycle thing. You're working with certain insects certain times a year, and certain insects other times a year. There are no insects really that persist all year round. What color is it? And is its body hard or soft? Again, those are good ID questions that can indicate life cycle or indicate life stage. A lot of insects look very different between life stages, and I've got a few examples of those coming up. What kind of damage is there? Is it chewing damage? Is it piercing and sucking damage? Is there any damage at all? And that's an important question we have to ask ourselves. I teach entomology as well, and the reality is a lot of people are petrified of insects, and I routinely come across people who that fear is so visceral that they will see an insect and assume damage when there isn't any. So it needs to be said, is there any damage? Because if you can tolerate something, then that's ultimately in the best interest. What kind of legs, mouth parts, wings, or antennae? Those are really important. I encourage you to learn the terminology of those things, because those make internet searching very, very easy when you know exactly what words to use. But when you know the different kinds of legs, mouth parts, wings, or antenna, it helps you a lot in the ID process. And again, don't forget about context, because the environment is going to always determine what kind of insects that you have. So this is our toolbox. What we're going to go through now are all of the options listed in the Virginia Tech Home and Grounds Pest Management book. It's that are listed under the organic or natural control section. It's not that big. It's only like a page or two, but kind of, it's a good primer for you all, especially with the natural pest control products that are available at the garden center. I know that there are probably a lot of products at a garden center that people walk by, like, or diatomaceous earth. Like, what the heck is that? These are natural products that we're going to go through now to give you all an idea of what they are. So when you see them, you know if it could help you or not. So the first one we're going to talk about is azadirachtin. This is an abiotic control measure. Abiotic meaning non-living. It is a derivative of the neem tree seed kernels. The neem tree is a subtropical tree. You're never going to see that growing naturally around here. And you've probably heard of the neem tree before if you've ever seen the product neem oil in the garden center. And it is important. We're going to make this distinction right now that azadirachtin is derived from the neem tree, but it is unequivocally not neem oil. Those are two very different products, and we're going to talk about neem oil after this one. Azadirachtin is derivative of the seed of the neem tree, and it acts as a growth regulator. It acts as an anti-feeder. It repels certain insects, and it inhibits oviposition, which means it inhibits or stops or slows down egg laying in insects. It's a very, very effective and commonly used insecticide. As of now, such that I'm aware, no insect resistance has been documented for this one. So it's being very widely used and very effectively used, and it's quite safe for people. However, it's labeled for a lot of different things like beetles, aphids, and caterpillars. It's very versatile and really obtainable and labeled for nearly all garden pests, which means that if you go and start spraying your plants with it, it could be harmful to other things too that maybe you're not trying to kill. So that's just for a lot of these products. We want to remember a lot of these products are not selective, and products that are not selective are going to impact a lot more of the food web than just the thing that you're targeting. So next we have neem oil. So this is a product that also comes from the neem tree, but this does not contain azadirachtin. This is simply just an oil product that comes from the neem tree. And it's very similar to all the other horticultural oils on the market in that it's a broad spectrum insecticide / fungicide that smothers and suffocates insects. So it's non-selective, and because it suffocates and smothers and doesn't work on like the biological systems of an insect per se, your coverage is crucial. And it means that, again, anything that you cover with this stuff, any other insect that you cover with this stuff, it's gonna negatively impact them. But horticultural oils for the most part, and this product as well, is gonna work best on your small, soft-bodied insects like aphids, maybe mites, the soft, sensitive the soft, sensitive life stage of scale insects. Since this is happening down here in Hampton Roads, I'm sure a lot of you might be familiar with crepe myrtle bark scale. A very well-timed application of this probably isn't going to fix the problem, but could be moderately effective. So again, small, soft-bodied insects, that's what horticultural oil works best for. And then there are a range of other horticultural oils that are derived from other things besides neem oil. And they all function in the same way as neem oil does. They suffocate and smother soft-bodied insects. And a note on the fact that these are labeled as fungicides as well. So they do, technically they serve to suffocate fungal spores. However, I will say that in my experience, I never really had much luck spraying for funguses that I already saw happening, or like fungal outbreaks that I already saw happening. Funguses thrive via water. So when you're spraying a fungus with something, it tends to, I think, my experience, kind of backfire on you. Used as a preventative, you may see some success, but if you see your fungus or see something there and you're trying to hit it with a fungicide, it's very unlikely this would be very effective for you. Anyhow, that aside, we mentioned that horticultural oil is good for small, soft-bodied insects, and typically you're going to see horticultural oil labeled as in two different grades. You'll see dormant oil and you'll see all seasons oil, or AKA summer oil. And the distinction between these two is that your all seasons or summer oil, that's the stuff that works well for small, soft-bodied insects. Dormant oil is one that that is effective to use on woody plants that are dormant during the winter time. Excuse me. Specifically for scale insects, hard shelled scale insects that are overwintering on your woody plant material. It's dormant oil is typically a much rougher, like less refined, darker oil than your all seasons oil, which is like a softer, more clear version of the oil. Insecticidal soap. This is a really good one that can damage the protective covering of soft-bodied insects, causing them to dehydrate. You've probably experienced, if you've ever washed your hands with a non-moisturizing soap, how it has kind of a drying effect on them. And you kind of experience the same thing with small soft-bodied insects. Be careful making household remedies, and I only say this because I've done it and it did not work out well for me. I accidentally burned the heck out of my plants. A lot of your household dish soaps are going to be a little bit harsher than the products that are used to make insecticidal soaps. Not saying it's not possible, just be mindful. You don't want to use too much of something that could harm your plant, cause foliar burns, things like that. But it is possible, you just got to be careful. Hot pepper wax. So this is another product you commonly find. The active ingredient is capsaicin, which is the material in peppers that make them hot. I've never seen a hot pepper wax plant product that wasn't derived from cayenne. Might be some out there that are derived from different peppers. I don't know, but I think most of them are derived from cayenne. This doesn't kill insects. It only works as a repellent. It's like a deterrent that can be used indoors and outdoors to repel all sorts of aphids, mites, thrip, whitefly, lace bugs, leaf hoppers. Also can be effective against mammals as well. However, I would recommend if you're using it for mammals, try to get a concentrated version if you can, if you're able to, that allows you to mix yourself in different rates. Because oftentimes or at least I used to work in a garden center, and I've seen the pre-mixed versions, sometimes you don't get quite as good of an effect. So next we have kaolin clay. This is a non-toxic clay product. It's derived from kaolinite, which is one of the more common clays in our region's soil. And as you can see, it coats and disguises the plant with a white film. There's no chemical content in there. It's not toxic to anything. It's literally just a disguise that's used to kind of prevent insects from perceiving the plant as being a food source. It's very commonly used in pears and apples, and it's known to be effective against Japanese beetles, which is good, and all sorts of other kinds of beetles that go after our vegetables. You'll often see the film of this stuff on organic produce, left from the washing process of organic produce in the grocery store. Diatomaceous earth. Excuse me. This is one I mentioned before, another abiotic. This is a powder. It's composed of one-celled fossilized soil-borne organisms called diatoms. They have microscopic, razor-sharp edges that lacerate insect bodies, and this stuff comes in a powderized form in bags. And it works very well to control slugs, millipedes, cockroaches, and ants, and definitely soft-bodied insects. But you got to be very careful. Again, this is one that isn't selective per se. It's going to be lethal to the things that work for you as well, such as honeybees especially. So you certainly don't want to be applying this product to plants in flower. But I've had great success sprinkling a ring of this around certain vegetable plants when I know that I have slugs or snails congregating around the base. Additionally, prolonged exposure can cause lung and skin irritations. That's something you want to be aware of, and use what would be called the natural grade. But I think for the most part, that's what I've seen available in garden centers when you're talking about getting the stuff for home use in the garden. All right, so moving on to some more common chemicals here. Pyrethrum is a very common insecticide that you see available in garden centers. It's often labeled like in a way that makes it seem like it's natural because it is derived from chrysanthemum flowers. This has now started to come in a couple different forms, pyrethrins and pyrethroids. And just so you're aware of the terminology, like when you're in the garden center and you're looking at something, pyrethrins are insecticidal compounds extracted from pyrethrum. So they would be considered, natural. They would be considered of the chrysanthemum plant. Whereas pyrethroids are synthetically produced compounds that are similar to pyrethrins. So, you want to understand the distinction there. If that's really important to you. You often see both available at garden centers, or one or the other. But like I said, this one paralyzes but may not kill, so you're going to often see it mixed with a horticultural oil or mixed with some other substance that'll help ensure eradication. It's got a low toxicity to us, which makes it quite safe, but it's very toxic to other insects, and it's especially toxic to aquatic wildlife. So again, it's quote unquote natural, but it's not necessarily the safest thing in the world. And this is one that we're seeing quite a bit of resistance to in larger scale agriculture. Insect resistance, as in insects are developing a resistance to this, such that we're in a lot of places, you're only seeing, if you do an application of this, you're only seeing about a 25% or less kill rate on the targeted insect. That, although I will clarify there that doesn't mean it won't be effective in your home garden, because that whole context is quite different. All right, now we're going to move on to biotic pest control measures, meaning that they are alive. Typically, they contain microbes. The ones we'll talk about specifically are bacteria, fungi, and nematodes. These are, in a lot of ways, these are really good because they have a narrow targeted range of effectiveness. And that is a vastly superior option than spraying something that kills your whole food web or affects your whole food web. The more specific our target can be via the product, the better it's going to be for the diversity in our system. So there's a lot of benefit to these. They have relatively low toxicity to animals and humans. And like I said, they can avoid that whole going nuclear kind of mindset that a lot of our traditional chemistry relies on. So the first one we'll talk about is Bacillus thuringiensis, or BT. This is the most commonly used microbial insecticide on planet Earth. Actually, yeah, I see most commonly used in U.S. It's definitely the most commonly used in the U.S. and in the world. And it is derived from a soil-dwelling bacterium that parasitizes different subspecies of insects and their larvae. But you really want to read the label to make sure that you're getting what you need for what your problem is, because it's going to be effective against larval stages of many different insects, but which insects depend on what kind of BT you're getting. It must be consumed by the target to be effective, so your coverage is going to be key. The bacteria is going to paralyze the digestive tract and may even parasitize the insect itself. A liquid is always going to be a little more effective than a dust, because a liquid allows you to get some good coverage all over your plant. But just remember that BT does break down rapidly in sunlight. So applying in the middle of the day when it's really sunny is not going to be in your best interest for this particular product. And also remember that because it has to be consumed and it has to go through the digestive tract of the insect, patience is going to be key. You're going to have to give it about a week to start having a decent effect. So the kind that we often see for Lepidoptera larvae or caterpillar larvae is the Bacillus thuringiensis variety Christaki. And this is the one that we commonly use for leaf feeders in our vegetable gardens. And that predominantly is cabbage loopers and cabbage worms. We can also use it for all sorts of other caterpillars like bagworms that we see on our trees, tent caterpillars, and European corn borers. This is something that we see genetically engineered. Our BT is something we're seeing genetically engineered in corn for a lot of large-scale agriculture. But unfortunately, we are seeing resistance build up for that already. So, I guess it's only a matter of time. Now, we also have BT variety Israelensis, which is the one you commonly see used for mosquitoes. Also works for black fly and fungus gnat larvae. And this is the one you see in dunk products that you can just throw into your fountains and things like that to keep mosquitoes away. But we always try to recommend just eliminating the standing water source if you can. It's always the best possible scenario. So, if you're talking about a fountain, that's one thing. But if you have, an old pot or tire, like a tire in your backyard with standing water in it, that's oftentimes a very, very bad breeding ground for mosquitoes. So just dumping it out is going to be more effective a lot of times than resorting to something like this. Milky spore. This is another soil-borne bacterium called Bacillus papulae, but also another product is derived from Bacillus lindomorbus. This is applied to turf, and it's in a granular form and watered so it penetrates below. And this will help control Japanese beetle larvae and other larvae to a lesser extent. But what it does is the bacteria parasitizes the larvae and consumes it. This you definitely want to apply around August because that's when Japanese beetle larvae, starting in about July and moving into August, September, are laying their eggs in soil. And this can survive in soil for many years, but only if the larval infestation is high. And you want to remember that this bacteria is seeking a food source. That food source is larvae. And if there are no larvae there, then your product isn't going to have all that much of an effect. Next is spinosad. This is another chemical compound derived from a soil-dwelling bacteria called Sarcopolyspora spinosa. And this is a very common product available at garden centers. If you look at the active ingredient on your pesticides, this will kill via contact and ingestion and acts as a neural disruptor. You often see this as a remedy for fire ants, but also works for caterpillars, thrips, leaf miners, and some beetles. This is another one that is toxic to bees, so be careful with your timing and be careful with your target. But the good news is relatively safe for humans and animals. Bavaria bassiana, this is another microbial, but this one's a fungus as opposed to a bacteria, and it's pretty non-discriminate. It'll parasitize nearly any insect, especially everything that we see as a positive. Contact is critical in the application, and good coverage is key. And you want to give it some time, just like with anything else. Give it a little time to do its work, and you'll probably see some good effectiveness after like 3 to 7 days. Nematodes, won't get in too much into this. These are microscopic worm-like parasites. Some are good and some are bad, but we can buy nematodes that work against many of our garden and agricultural pests, such as weevils, cutworms, mole crickets, and grubs. But the type of the nematode depends on the target. So, be aware of what you're buying. And be sure that you're buying from someone reputable, because when you buy nematodes, you have to make sure that they were given the right environment to not die. They have to be stored correctly. And if you're buying it from someone who didn't store them correctly, it's likely that you'll be buying dead nematodes. All right, now sorry, I'm kind of flying through here to get through on time. Now we're gonna go through a couple beneficial insects that are labeled in our pest control guide. The first one being the assassin bug. This is a naturally occurring insect in North America with roughly 160 species. This one doesn't persist all season, because it only has about one generation a year. And you see a lot of great control when assassin bugs are around of aphids, caterpillars, and beetles. But you want to be careful because assassin bugs, at least in my experience, haven't been shy about biting people too if you get too close. But they do a great job for us in the garden, that's for sure. So we want to do what we can to help them proliferate. Bean beetle parasite. This is one that is available commercially. It's shipped inside the host. The adult is shipped inside the host, and it'll emerge and lay eggs in host larvae. So if you're a bean grower and you have a lot of problems with bean beetles, I would recommend exploring this, because this is one that you can find available for sale. But they don't overwinter, so you'd have to keep buying them every single year. Damsel bug. This is similar to the assassin bug. It's a relative, but it's smaller. It's a generalist feeder, which means it's going to be going after pretty much everything that's smaller and soft-bodied. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that it won't go after some good guys too. So it's something you want to watch out for. But they have multiple generations a year, which make them potentially even more valuable than the assassin bug. And like a lot of the ones we're going to talk about, plant diversity aids quite a bit in proliferation, especially like native perennial plants. A diversity of native perennial plants really helps population of damsel bugs. So remember that. You want to be building that plant diversity in your garden to help lift up these and diversify these food webs. And unfortunately, damsel bugs are not commercially available, however. Big-eyed bug. This one is subtly very effective in the garden. It's a voracious general predator that looks not really distinct, doesn't look like much more than a little fly, but it's very abundant in almost all landscapes and gardens and crops. It goes after aphids, caterpillar eggs, and their larvae, their smaller larvae. It'll go after immature bugs and leafhoppers, and also spider mites. And they have multiple generations a year. They're present throughout the whole growing season. And just like the damsel bug, this one will be very greatly benefited by plant diversity. Also, this one's not commercially available. Predaceous stink bugs. So some people may not know it, but there are some stink bugs out there that are doing some good work for us in the garden. They feed on more than 100 garden pest insects. The adults and the nymphs both will attack prey larger than themselves, which is a great benefit, especially with beetles. They'll overwinter in plant debris. So you definitely, in this case, you definitely want a year-round ground cover. It's good to have a mulch, year-round mulch to help these ones proliferate. A couple examples of the spine soldier bug and the two-spotted stink bug. It varies which species of these are commercially available, but not all of them are. The syrphid fly, or AKA the hover fly, which you have probably seen. So you may not know about these, is their larvae love aphids. These adults will seek out aphid colonies and lay their eggs around them, and the larvae will emerge and feed on the aphids. And you can see up to 70 to 100% control when hoverfly populations are good. So another one to keep in mind, plant diversity helps with these ones too, because the adults will graze through flowers. And this one is also not commercially available. And of course, the ladybug, can't forget about her. This one feeds mainly on aphids. The larvae feeds mainly on aphids and other soft-bodied insects like mealybug and spider mite. The adult, you will see some feeding of aphids as well, but it's really the larvae that you get a lot of great control of aphids with. And these are commonly sold, but what you will also find is when they become an adult, they tend to fly away and not stick around very long in one place. So that can make them not very practical, but I do know people who've had great success with these. The green lacewing we'll talk about the kind of similar to the ladybug in that their larvae will just decimate aphids, and so much so that they've even been referred to as aphid lions. And it's not just aphids. They'll eat pretty much anything that's around them. The adults, on the other hand, are not predaceous. They're also very weak flyers, so they're considered a good alternative to lady beetles because they're less prone to dispersing after they have flown away. Or sorry, after they have become adults. They tend to stick around in one place. Predatory mites, Phytocillus persimilis. This is a really interesting one if you have spider mite problems, because they not only will feed on spider mites, they can supplement their diet with plant pollen, which means they tend to stay in one place and act as like guard dogs or bodyguards to a plant, whatever you want to call it. But not only will they feed on spider mites, they'll feed on thrip too. So talk about a great garden tool. And they become active in spring before spider mite populations get big. So, you know, there is a great control measure, and you can buy these ones and release them into your garden year round if you have really bad spider mite or thrip problem. Really, really neat and effective tool. And speaking of arachnids, because mites are technically arachnids, how could you say no to spiders? How could you be scared of spiders, even though I know that's kind of a stupid question. A lot of people are petrified of spiders, but just please keep in mind, regardless of how you feel about them, that there are 43,000 species of spider in the world, and only a handful pose any danger to humans. And the vast, vast majority of them hunt smaller insects that humans consider pests, and that, you know, we would consider problematic in our gardens for sure. So be open to spiders, even if you're scared of them. It's okay. Parasitic wasps. There are literally tons of these things flying around in our gardens and flying around and out there in the environment that thrive off diverse landscapes, especially of native plants. They're tiny little solitary wasps that attack eggs of many different pest species, and many that we consider you know, pests in our garden, like cutworms, corn borers, cabbage worms, cabbage loopers. It's another one you can generally buy from most commercial insect distributors. The adults will lay their egg in a host egg, and larvae and pupa develop there. And again, plant diversity encourages populations. And then we have the Incarcia wasp, or Incarcia formosa. This one has been used worldwide commercially for whitefly control in the greenhouse. It specifically prefers whitefly eggs. This one's been used for over 100 years for whitefly control in greenhouses, even before the advent of chemicals came along. It'll feed on any developmental stage of the host except the egg. It feeds on the developmental stages past the egg. It tends to prefer the third and fourth whitefly larval instars for oviposition. That's when it'll lay its egg inside the host. And then lastly, we have the minute pirate bug, or the Aureus insidiosus. This is one of the very first predators to appear in spring, which means that it's going to be there as soon as your pests start to show up, which means it's of great benefit. It's a very, very active general predator of all the life stages of most smaller, soft-bodied pests, all the things that we would consider pests in the garden. And it can kill up to 80 thrips in a day. And that's really valuable, because thrips, if you're not familiar with thrips, they are just as small, if not smaller, than spider mites, which make them very hard to detect, very hard to control. So this one is a great friend to have in the garden, and another one that does benefit from diversification of plant material and planting native plants, native perennial plants in your landscape. All right, I only went 5 minutes over, so that is it.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Chris. Very lovely presentation. I learned some things as well, as always. But we do have a couple questions, and let me get back to where I'm at. Okay, I was able to answer a few of them.
Okay.
But I have a question here from Judy. She's asking if kaolin clay could be used on peaches. I was trying to look in the PMG to check that. I did not see it listed, but do you know?
Yes, it is. It should be labeled for peaches. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We have another one.
I'm trying to find my chat box so I can see. I don't know where it went.
Okay. I'm sorry. I know I'm going to mispronounce his name again, and I apologize in advance. Tanisha, should I use something now to prevent bugs?
Now?
Yes.
Well, I would need to know which bugs and where and what capacity. It's kind of a loaded question.
Yes. Yes. Okay. And then I have one question about what's effective for horse flies. Someone else chimed in. Oh, Rhonda chimed in with a recommendation with the Arbico Organics or other biological control suppliers for fly control. But are you aware of anything else to add on to that?
Okay, so I am guilty. I'm a city boy. I guarantee you someone like Roy or someone with more experience on the farm could give you some insight into that. That's one I'd be glad to look into, but I don't know or have enough information right now to give you an educated guess. But that is something that I could look into for sure.
Yes, I did look into the PMG for that one. If you're just spraying on surfaces like, to repel, or if they land, bifenthrin is labeled for flies. But like if you have horses or something and need to apply for horses, we would have to ask a specialist about that.
Yeah, that's not something that I have to deal with that often. I mean, most
Me
experience
neither.
I have is with horse flies is going to the Eastern Shore, and for that reason, I just tend to avoid camping out there in summer.
Yes, and now, yeah, that bifenthrin recommendation is, like I said, on server. That is not for in the vegetable garden.
Yep, and that's something you wouldn't want to plant on your veggies.
Yep. Asian lady beetle, pest or beneficial, from Amy?
Both, actually. So the Asian lady beetle was actually introduced by the USDA in the 70s to help our native lady beetle with aphid control in agriculture. The problem is it reproduces and proliferates a heck of a lot faster than our native lady beetle. So, for that reason, it could be a nuisance. Additionally, the Asian lady beetle likes to overwinter in our homes, and that can make them a nuisance as well. But they certainly, as far as aphid control or pest control in our gardens and agricultural crops, they do have an upside. So it just depends on kind of how you feel about them.
Okay. A couple more questions from Joyce. How do I control scale on my evergreens and shrubs? They are white hard shell over eggs. I'm not sure that I understand that last part, but they have white hard shell.
I would recommend you figure out what kind of aphid they are. White hard shell over eggs, offhand, I'm thinking either maybe cottony taxus or wax scale, or maybe some kind of tea scale. It could be a number of things. If you know exactly what it is, and to figure that out, you can just send pictures to an extension agent or a sample to an extension agent. You can find out when those eggs will hatch and when the little crawlers will emerge. And that point in time is when you want to apply a horticultural oil. That is your target time frame, is whenever the scale species eggs hatch. That's when you make your application. So Joyce, I'd recommend getting a sample or pictures into your local extension agent and figuring out exactly what it is, and that'll tell you exactly when to make that application.
Mm-hmm. And then we have a final comment from a fellow Chris out there, mentioning that we have a pool and the horse flies have been attacking us recently. And like I said, I've been using the bifenthrin around my property. Like I said, I don't use that in my vegetable garden, but it's labeled for use indoor and outdoors. and I haven't had any issues on my site personally.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure, go ahead, Rhonda.
This was a question I got today on our Facebook page in Hampton. And I'd never heard of this, the Virginia white tiger moth. She thought that that was what was eating her kale. And I did see that that is one of their host plants. And I asked her another question. She hadn't responded to me yet, you know, because they look very, I don't know if they look similar to the white cabbage butterfly, but the larva is definitely completely different. And I think there are two different kinds of BT you would use, whether it was a moth or whether it was a caterpillar, I mean, whether it was a butterfly. Would you ever use both BT if you couldn't find, I think I know the answer to this, ID the larva.
Right, but for most larvae, and I'm pretty sure the tiger moth would be included, the BT Krustaki,
Uh-huh.
the most widely available one, would be effective.
Okay, okay. She was using the Awazi, I think it's for wax moths, or BT Awazi, AIWAZA. So yeah, I recommended the other one.
Yeah, and that might be an issue. And she also, you know, if she didn't mention, you know, the frequency or rate in which she's applying, I mean, it is important to stay on top of your application.
Right.
It would be possible to make an application thinking that, you know, doing one is good, and you don't have to do it again. It's the kind of thing you definitely have to stay on top of throughout the season. Probably doing it every 7 to 10 days would be
right. Or just be proactive and put row cover on it before they even have a chance.
Right. Row cover is a great idea. Also, tennis rackets.
Great.
100% organic.
Yep, and then just a final question. Do you recommend a book or site for pest control in gardens?
I'm assuming that means pest control. I would recommend the Virginia Cooperative Extension resources, because it depends on, of course, what pest you have, but the Virginia Cooperative Extension resources on vegetable gardening give you a lot of tips on how to mitigate pests with good culture. There is also a pest control guide that Virginia Cooperative Extension has that you can get access to through your local extension agent. I saw in the chat box, I think you mentioned you were wondering if there are anything you can do to mitigate pests right now in your garden. And from a chemical standpoint, I wouldn't recommend spraying anything right now as a preventative. I would recommend researching what it is that you have in your garden, finding out what they need to be pest-free and grow healthy, or like what they need to be very healthy. Go out into your garden and determine, you know, what is happening out there that goes against what your plants need to be happy and pest-free. That would be the best form of pest control I would recommend as a preventative right now in your garden.
All right, well, awesome. Just some final thoughts here. I do have the post test up right now. If you would be kind enough to take that for us, please, before you leave. Also, the pest management guide Chris mentioned is also available as a PDF copy for free.
Okay.
And then if you want a physical copy, you have to go to our Virginia Tech pesticide programs. You have to order and pay for it, shipping included. And then also when we give out pesticide recommendations, it is important that you all follow the label. The label is the law in Virginia, as well as many other states in the country. So, you know, make sure the insect that you're trying to control for is on that label that you're looking for.
Right, and to jump off that, if you do call an extension agent asking for a pesticide recommendation, please absolutely know what it is that you are trying to spray, because an extension agent won't make a recommendation unless they know exactly what it is that you're trying to spray for.
All right. Once again, thank you for joining us today on your Sunday afternoon. We will meet next week and talk about herb fruit production and also what to do with your harvest when we get to that point. So otherwise, you all take care of yourself and we will see you next week.
Thank you all.
All right, thanks for coming, Chris. I appreciate you.
Yeah, no problem at all. My pleasure.
Yep.
Hey, Chris,
Yes,
are you willing to share that presentation
absolutely.
for us to, as Master Gardeners, to present? Or is that, yeah,
I usually present to master gardeners, but
right.
yeah, no, there'd be no problem. Just bear in mind that a lot of the pictures on there are just Google image search.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah, this session was also recorded. Now get the presentation from Chris and it'll be uploaded once it
Cool.
gets to our extension website for Hampton, and I'll share it with Chris if he would like to post it on the Norfolk website as well.
Yeah, we can do that. It wouldn't be a problem.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks.
Yeah, no
Yep.
problem.
You're welcome, and take care, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you. Let's see.